Between a continuing pandemic and a literal land war on the European continent, 2022 isn't going to win any awards for best year anytime soon. Additionally, 2022 was our first year without one of America's most beloved entertainers. That's right, Aaron Carter, whose hit song I Want Candy spent many months in my McDonald's hit clip player, sadly passed away. But even worse, we also lost Betty White on the very last day of 2021. We absolutely should have known how 2022 would go based on that alone. It's truly hard to find someone more beloved and respected over their career than Betty White, which is why I was surprised to learn she was actually in a horror movie, the one we're looking at today, Lake Placid. To be clear, Betty White is not one of the main protagonists of this film, but if she wasn't in it, I wouldn't have found it at all, and she actually makes a greater impact on both the story and me as a viewer than one of the main characters. Public sentiment also tends to point to her as the main reason to even watch the movie. Made in 1999, Lake Placid was directed by Steve Miner. If you've heard that name before, he also directed Friday the 13th, Parts 2 and 3, and Halloween H2O by this point. He would also go on to direct the 2008 remake of George Romero's Day of the Dead. The film also had a significant budget of around $30 million. That would be over $50 million today. For comparison, the entire Blumhouse Halloween trilogy cost about the same. So with that out of the way, let's get to the actual movie. We open with a sheriff and a state fish and game employee conducting a small expedition with some very witty banter.
Ask me, what an animal does in the wild is his own business. As long as he doesn't do it to man. I think Mark Twain said that.
Yeah, I think he didn't. But since you said it, I guess we're covered.
Everyone's a comedian sarcastic.
What was that line delivery? Everyone's a comedian, sarcastic, or everyone's a comedian sarcastic? A comedian sarcastic, like a philosopher king. The delivery is just bizarre, and it's not the last time he'll do it either. Anyways, the wildlife expert snorkels to find some kind of nest when he's pulled back under the water and towards the surface, where he's physically dragged towards the sheriff in the boat. The sheriff grabs him and struggles to pull the expert back into the boat, but only, half succeeds. Sometime after this in New York City, a paleontologist, Kelly Scott, just got dumped by her boyfriend.
Kevin dumped me.
I know.
He told you?
Well, I sort of had inside information.
You?
It started before you, Kelly. I never would have.
You?
It was just a quick thing that we thought was over, and it's not over.
You and Kevin.
I wish I could say something to. The heart wants what the heart wants.
Hey.
Hey, Kevin, what's going on? What's happening? How's it going? How's your family? Good? That's great. So nice to see you. Fuck off.
This is business.
Oh, you were dating your boss. That's always a stellar idea. Anyways, he's here to explain they recovered a tooth from the wildlife expert's body, and it looks prehistoric, so he needs her to go to Maine to look at it.
Couldn't have come from any bear. Evidently, it looks prehistoric, like maybe a dinosaur.
Oh, well, then I'm sure that that's what it was. He was killed by a dinosaur. Is there anything else?
To do with that?
I don't do field work, and even if I did, Maine? I'm allergic to timber.
Kelly?
I'm not going to Maine. I'm not going to Maine. It's ridiculous.
They did that thing where the character said she would not do something, and then in the next cut, they do it. Comedy. Wait, Maine? I had so many Florida jokes prepared for this video. Are you kidding me? There's a crocodile on the cover, and Lake Placid is an actual city in Florida. Why on earth would this take place in Maine? I guess it's a Stephen King reference? Anyways, the paleontologist meets Sheriff Keogh, the sheriff who was on the boat, and they head to the morgue to look at the tooth and the body of the wildlife expert, where Kelly notes the tooth is essentially out of a wormhole in time.
This is reptilian, and this is not a fossil. You really pulled this out of this guy?
Yes, I did.
After all this, Kelly decides to join the sheriff and a group of Maine wildlife experts to figure out what exactly is going on with the lake.
What kind of backup do we have?
We.
What?
Well, I'm a little unclear as to why the museum would send somebody here.
You got a thing against museums?
No, I got nothing against museums.
Ever been in one? What is that?
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
God.
Remember back in the late 90s when people were telling you to be careful about the ozone layer? Yeah, this is why. Kelly's like this the entire movie. It just becomes a whole gag that she's this New York girl who absolutely cannot figure out how to camp with these darn yokels. Which ultimately ends up just devolving into her complaining all the time.
Hey,
You threw it at me!
I just let go of it.
You threw it at me! Did you see that? Oh!
ma'am.
Stop hitting me.
Don't throw heads at me!
Ma'am, it's
Stop
not his
calling me ma'am! Oh my God, worms. Oh, I got a thing about worms. I'm gonna get ticks, I know it. They're just so drawn to me. I got a thing about ticks. Curl up your pant leg.
They also introduced Jack Wells in this scene, who is Kelly's love interest. However, I will be ignoring all of his scenes in which he and Kelly set up their romance that happens at the end of the movie because they are boring and this character is one-dimensional. You're welcome.
Some museum sent you, huh?
What, are we all museum bigots in Maine?
She's rude, sarcastic. You two should get along.
There it is again, the hyphenated, sarcastic adjective. What is with this guy? So they head off to talk with the absolute best part of the movie, Betty White as Mrs. Bickerman. And I'll just let you guys be the judge of how much of an asset she is to this film.
Well, my husband passed away. It's been almost 2 years now.
My department doesn't have any record of that, Mrs. Bickerman.
Well, I'm sorry. Incomplete records haunt me so.
Do you know how your husband died?
Oh, yes. I killed him.
You killed him?
Oh, yes.
And how would you have accomplished this, ma'am?
Well, he was very sick, and he refused to go to a doctor. He'd be coherent one day and incoherent the next. And, well, one coherent day, he asked me to end his suffering. And he kept insisting and insisting, and, well, finally, I just gave in. And I hit him on the head with a skillet, and then buried him under the bulkhead. Well, dig him up if you don't believe me, Sherlock.
Absolute Chad behavior.
What's with the water? It's so black. There's no waves or anything.
Well, they wanted to call it Lake Placid, but somebody said that name was taken.
Wait, it's called Black Lake and not Lake Placid? So even the title was a lie. Much like having me for a son, the disappointment just never ends. So they set up camp and boom, you have the basic premise for the rest of the film, as well as the main set. Well, there were really two sets. One real lake that was used for all scenes taking place on land, and then a second set for any time someone was in the water. The second one was a giant tank made to pass for part of the lake, and they took great pains to make it look the part.
For us. So we came to the conclusion that we would have to build our own tank, which we did by finding a piece of land out in Surrey that was cheap and leasing it, and then sinking in I think it was a 1.5 million gallon concrete tank, and then built all the trees and the rock faces and the waterfalls and the streams and the beaches around it. It turned out to be an immense job, this tank set, in part because we were going to shoot on it for so long that everything had to stay alive. And that meant, since we didn't have any real trees in the background like we did with the rest of the lake stuff, we had to bring in huge trees, 80, 100 feet tall. We ferried them down the Fraser River, then had them put with the root balls onto giant trucks, brought in, craned in, and then set up an irrigation system, because from beginning to end, when the trees went in the ground until we finished shooting, was about 7 weeks. So it was immensely complicated and one of the biggest sets I've ever done.
So you can see where a lot of the budget ended up going. It's an unusually large amount of effort that you tended not to see with a lot of these kind of humorous slashers back in the post-Scream era. There's one last member to add to the cast, though.
Oh,
Hector Sear, he's this rich kook mythology professor.
So this dude is Hector Sear. He's billed as the Steve Irwin of crocodiles. He's apparently super wealthy, but just uses his time doing weird stuff like swimming with the crocs and just kind of appears whenever some new crocodile discovery occurs somehow, and he's here to help the gang find the crocodile while casually making wildly inappropriate sexual comments.
Quick scout. Have you had a little work done?
I have not.
Who are you? Hector Sear. I said it once. Let me know when it sinks in, okay?
Their signatures are unmistakable.
She tell you that we had sex together? So vigorous.
I never had sex with you.
I'm horrible in bed. They never remember.
He's also incredibly rude for just no reason.
You know, Sheriff, when friends or family say things, they tend not to register, so sometimes it helps to hear it from a total stranger. You're fat.
Jesus, Hector.
Oh, yeah.
So while they're off on their fact-finding mission, their boat gets flipped, but no one actually gets hurt and no one sees the creature. While drying off back on the shore, they find a toe that's been partially dissolved by stomach acid.
Some decomposition, a little acidic. Definitely been swallowed.
Is this the man who was killed?
He seemed taller.
You got a croc, all right. They're a keystone species.
Did he just explain something?
Keystone species affects the whole ecosystem. That will explain these worms and those perch.
You got a crocodile.
So yeah, this scene is treated as the moment definitive evidence of a crocodile is found, but it doesn't make much sense. Worms on a toe and perch in the lake prove a crocodile is around. I spent some time Googling, but couldn't find much that backs up this scene scientifically. I did, however, find the actual creature they based the croc on. It's called the Sarcosuchus imperator, apparently translating to flesh crocodile emperor, which is actually terrifying. They lived around 120 million years ago, but whatever, let's just take it at face value that we now know a croc is around. Later that night, Hector throws a party at the camp.
Law enforcement is very dangerous work, isn't it? And you have such big, wonderful boobs.
No, that's not something you reply thank you to. That's weird. He's weird. Stop. Fortunately, Sheriff Kiao breaks up the party. Later that night, the sheriff gets up to take a leak and has another chance encounter with Hector.
Jesus fucking Christ!
What the hell are you doing?
What the hell are you doing?
You're crawling around.
I'm laying a spring trap.
A spring trap.
This could end up saving your life, which is
Man,
meaningful
I'm sure
for
you
you.
came first year
Because
class,
the
but
longer
I
you
think you need
live,
to be
the more
retired
sex
from
you
the
get to have with your
rubber room.
sister.
What's going on?
So after Hector's impassioned defense of a sexual act illegal in 48 states, congrats to Rhode Island and New Jersey, by the way, the characters go more into the lore, if you can call it that, of crocodiles throughout history.
Well, the thing about Hector is he takes this crocodile business very... Oh, man, well, he thinks they're godly.
What was that?
In his defense, every primitive culture known to man deified them. Ancient China, Egypt, Australia, Asia. Going back in history, crocodiles have been more worshipped than Jesus.
So once again, I looked this up, and yeah, there was some crocodile worship. I found some story about a crocodile in India said to guard a temple. Also, that crocodile is vegan. But more worship than Jesus seems to be a pretty big overstatement.
We should get some sleep.
Damn it!
The next day, the crew heads out and uses the sounds of distressed baby crocodiles to lure it while they're underwater with it? This seems like a bad idea, but apparently they're doing it because Hector is like the Eliza Thornberry of crocodiles. While they're out looking, back at the boat, something snags the anchor, dunking Kelly into the water. It seems like she's in trouble, but it's just a fake out as one of the divers climbs back on board. But as they're about to leave, the croc straight up decapitates one of the officers.
That it?
Back on the shore, Hector tries to show sympathy and it goes about how you'd expect with this character.
You know, I used to have a recurring nightmare that I was headless. I'd be down on the ground, looking up at my body, no head, just walking around, bumping into everything. And my parents wouldn't let me in the house because they just bought all these new antique lamps and they didn't want me to knock them over, the fuckers. And then the neighborhood bullies, they'd see my rounded head on the ground looking like a ball, and then they'd come over and they'd start a soccer game. And as I was being kicked around, I'd actually just feel grateful for being allowed in the game.
Sheriff Kyo gets caught up in one of Hector's traps and decides it's finally time to send Hector to the Shadow Realm, but before he can, a grizzly bear arrives only to be devoured by the croc. Savage. There's some serious crossover potential between this franchise and Cocaine Bear if that movie turns out to be a hit. This series would later go over to have a crossover with Anaconda, by the way. They actually did bring a real bear on set, but it was apparently terrified of the 30-foot animatronic crocodile to the point where they had to hide the crocodile while the bear was on set in order to get it to act properly.
There was a scene where the bear gets attacked by the crocodile. So the trainer brings in a live bear. The live bear comes in, gets a look at our hydraulic crocodile, and runs right off of the set. And we were all like laughing, and it refused to come back. Smart bear.
Anyways, back at camp, the bear incident gave the group enough information to figure out that the croc originated from Asia, which they determined by the shape of its scales.
Why would he come here? I mean, it's impossible. Asia. How would he get here?
Obviously, some asshole in Hong Kong flushed him down the toilet.
He was 30 feet, right? Had to be.
Right, well, now maybe somebody's happy I brought my big gun.
Oh, you gonna blow him away now?
I should think so,
With
yeah.
a cannon?
Right, what, I shouldn't?
Well, he's a miracle of nature, but I
Right,
know he's
that bites.
very
He
scary.
bites, right?
You should probably...
No, you're the miracle
easy,
of nature,
guys,
my friend.
easy, easy. We're not gonna do anything tonight.
The next morning, the group is taking a mold of one of the creature's footprints that they found when they spy Mrs. Bickerman leading a blindfolded cow directly to the creature for a snack. This, of course, leads to further questioning of her, which in turn means more Betty White scenes, which is always good.
The reason I lied, if I told you the truth, you'd hunt it down and kill it, which seems to be exactly what you're trying to do.
How long have you been feeding this thing?
6 years.
Well, your husband burned you. You didn't by any chance lead him to the lake blindfolded.
If I had a dick, this is where I'd tell you to suck it.
Did the crocodile kill your husband?
Yes. If I'd reported it, they'd have sent people to kill it.
Ma'am, how could you not report this? Puts human life at risk.
Nobody lives on this lake. It's really his lake now.
Meanwhile, Hector, convinced the crocodile won't hurt him, decides to take a dip and predictably it becomes a problem, with him noting that this croc is different from any other he has encountered.
Suddenly, I feel a bit foolish here. You're different from the others. Holy Spirit of Sobek.
In order to escape, he pops an inflatable raft, triggering the croc to attack that while he boards the chopper. He escapes unscathed. His helicopter does not. Once Hector is safely back on land, he is correctly chided for his reckless behavior.
No, you might think they're godly. You might get some spiritual lift out of backstroking with dragons, but you just put a deputy at risk out there,
Jack,
sir.
let's not overlook the fact that he didn't eat...
Because he just ate a cow, stupid.
Listen, I'm a civilian. I'm not a trout. You have no authority over me whatsoever.
Hey, I can arrest you.
Well, then do it.
However, Kelly feels differently and comes to his defense.
You hurt his feelings.
I don't care. Do you care? No, he's an asshole.
What is it with people simping for weird billionaires? I wonder if that'll be relevant in the future. Anyways, Hector convinces her that the croc is worth trying to take alive, and then both of them try to sell the rest of the group on the plan. Kelly, legitimately, why would you be in favor of this plan? You're a paleontologist. Surely you know more than anyone else how dangerous this creature is. Sure, I get why studying it alive would be important, but wouldn't it be more prudent to, say, use her contacts to shut down the U.S. Wildlife's plan to kill it, rather than just race the clock against them? That would be something only she could do as a paleontologist at what I assume is a highly respected museum in New York, but she just doesn't. I'm not sure why the writers work so hard to keep her in the story. We spend time at the beginning establishing the love triangle back in NYC so that she has an incentive to stay in Maine, just so she can kind of complain a lot and then be heavily influenced by a billionaire while making no actions unique to her role in the story. She doesn't seem to make any important decisions on her own. She's heavily influenced by those around her. It's a bit of a wasted character, really. Anyways, they start by stealing one of Betty White's cows for bait.
You can't take the cow by eminent domain.
We just did. We won't let her get hurt, ma'am.
You're all cocksuckers. I knew it first. I just didn't want to say it.
She absolutely wanted to say it.
I'm rooting for the crocodile. I hope he swallows your friends whole. You might want to arrest me for that, too. Is that a crime? To wish the chewing of law enforcement?
Nah, Betty, you got those First Amendment rights. So they spend a few hours dipping a cow in the water, trying to bait the croc, and it eventually does arrive later that night. They slowly swim the bovine to shore, where they should be able to trank it to sleep. However, the croc attacks sooner than anticipated, forcing Hector to jerk the helicopter up, eventually leading to him losing control of both the heifer and the copter.
Shit!
After a brief moment of silence, the croc reappears and knocks Hector off of his helicopter, just for a moment though, as the gator appears to use this as a distraction in order to get close to the shore without the rest of the group noticing, so it can launch a surprise attack. Everyone hops on the truck to escape, but Kelly falls out, forcing the group to confront the prehistoric reptile. The scenes with the crocodile out of water are the first really good glimpse the audience gets of it, and it's pretty well done overall. The budget really shows here. Some of the shots are CGI, but the CGI doesn't look half bad for 1999. The task of creating the CG shark was entrusted to the same people who did the CGI scenes for the Titanic. The other shots are done with practical effects where possible. The crew had a 30-foot-long waterproofed animatronic croc to work with, and I'm sure they were eager to do so whenever the scenes allowed. Eventually it decides Kelly do be looking like a snack though, so she swims underwater where it can't see as well, and tricks it into biting a massive pole, giving her enough time to escape onto the surface. Unfortunately, both she and Hector are forced to make a break for the shore as the croc jumps directly through the back of the helicopter, which turns out to be a blessing as it traps the big dino.
No, look, he's trapped. We done it. We done it. So what, it's not a net, but he's trapped. Mission accomplished. Shoot him. I got more drugs. He's half dead. He's half alive. Shoot him.
We don't have to destroy him. God damn it, look at him.
While they're debating whether or not to kill the massive crocodile, surprise, there's a second one, which Kyo swiftly blows up with the gun they've been teasing throughout the whole movie.
There's two. There's two. I can count. Back to one.
So everything's good now. They blew up one crocodile, kept the other for research. Kelly gets together with one of the secondary characters who barely got any screen time. And Lake Placid, Black Lake, is once again the perfect Maine getaway for Stephen King to go skinny dipping or whatever he does with his free time. That would be true if it wasn't for Betty White and her tendency to cause trouble wherever she goes. The final scene shows her hanging out on a dock, feeding some crocodile babies so they could set up potential sequels. Oh, Betty. And that was Lake Placid. It's certainly not the greatest horror film of all time, but it's also far from the worst. It's a slim viewing at only 82 minutes long, so it doesn't dawdle or overstay its welcome. Having the massive budget it did helped immensely, giving it a grander set and animatronic monster with some decent CGI. The humor was mixed. Kelly's was just city girl can't adapt to the woods, haha, and Hector's was all just very odd sexual statements. However, I think Sheriff Keogh and Betty White were legitimately funny. The series would go on to remain a one-off until the mid-2000s when Sci-Fi would get a hold of the rights, producing 5 sequels in total. None of them have the original cast or crew, so I'm not sure how sequel-y they really are, and with low budgets and critic scores to match, I don't think I'm game to find out anytime soon. I'll just stick with the original. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed our look at Lake Placid and have an excellent rest of your evening.